Spilled champagne on a marble floor makes a sound very like rain. Verity Holt stood in the small, wet hush of it, 20 steps from the Duke of Wrexmoor, when he laughed his beautiful laugh, and told 400 people he would sooner marry the plague. He believed he was refusing a plain nobody. He was refusing the one fortune in England that could have saved him. The ball at Wrexmoor House that spring was called a betrothal ball, though no name had yet been fixed to the betrothal. That was the peculiar fashion of it, and the ton found it delicious. Dominic, 9th Duke of Wrexmoor, 31, dark-haired and broad-shouldered and beautiful in the way that makes other men stand straighter and say less, had let it be known that he would choose a duchess before the season closed, and London had emptied its jewel cases accordingly. The chandeliers alone burned 400 candles. The heat of them lay on the bare shoulders of the prettiest women of 3 counties like a hand. And the mirrors doubled everything, the silk, the diamonds, the hunger, until the room seemed to hold 1,000 people, every one of them watching the Duke. What the mirrors did not show, because mirrors are honest only about surfaces, was that the 9th Duke of Wrexmoor was ruined. Not embarrassed, not stretched, ruined. His grandfather had mortgaged the northern farms to build the orangery. His father had gamed away the rest at faro, and died conveniently before the reckoning. And Dominic himself had spent 10 years being magnificent on paper that other men held. The great house blazing candles that night was blazing borrowed wax. His man of business, Mr. Pettigrew, a gray, careful person who had aged 10 years in the last 2, had put it to him in one sentence that winter: "Your Grace must marry money before Michaelmas, or the money will come and take the house." And so the betrothal ball. The Duke would choose a fortune and call it choosing a wife, and no one, this was the one thing his pride required, no one must ever guess which of the 2 he was actually choosing. Verity Holt came to that ball in dove-gray silk, with her mother's small string of river pearls at her throat, and stood where quiet girls stand, which is near the pillars. She was 22, slender, gray-eyed, with brown hair dressed plainly, and a face that people called sensible when they wished to be kind and plain when they did not. She had a trick of stillness that unnerved chattering people, and a way of watching a room as though she were reading it. Her father, Mr. Edmund Holt, stood beside her in his good coat that was 2 years behind the fashion. Soft-spoken and mild, a gentleman whose comfortable fortune had been got honestly in wool, which the ton regarded as very nearly the same thing as having no fortune at all. It was Mr. Pettigrew himself who had quietly let it be known, in the places where such things are let known, that his Grace would not sneer at a fortune got in trade. And it was on the strength of that whisper that Edmund Holt had done the bravest thing of his gentle life. He had written to the Duke's people, and offered his daughter's hand with a settlement of £20,000. £20,000 safe in the funds against a dukedom drowning in paper. It was not a presumption, it was a rescue. And the Duke had read the letter, and felt the truth of his own position close on his throat like a hand, and had come to the ball that night, carrying the letter's humiliation inside him the way a man carries a splinter, determined that if anyone was to bleed for it, it would not be him. The music paused between sets. That was all the accident there was to it. Lady Selina Fanshawe, the diamond of that season, golden and laughing, with the kind of beauty that has never once had to be brave, tapped the Duke's sleeve with her fan and said, loudly enough for her circle, "They say the wool man has offered for you, Wrexmoor, 20,000 fleeces. Shall you learn to card and spin?" And the Duke, because the whole room seemed suddenly to be looking at him, because the letter's truth was a splinter working toward his heart, because cruelty is the fastest camouflage pride knows, threw back his dark head and laughed his famous laugh into the lull where the music had been, and said, "Marry the woolman's daughter? I'd sooner marry the plague." A footman's tray tilted. One glass went over. champagne on marble, the sound of rain. And then the laughter came, rolling out from the Duke's circle in a widening ring like something dropped in still water, and 400 people turned, in the candlelight and the mirrors, to find the girl in dove gray by the pillar, so that there should be no mistake at all about whom the plague might be. Verity Holt did not flush, and did not sway, and did not look at the floor. She would remember all her life the heat of the candles, the smell of spilled wine and hot wax, the exact rustle 400 people make when they turn. She looked once, levelly across the ballroom at the Duke of Wrexmoor, and the Duke, still smiling, met her eyes, and something in him, he would spend years trying to name it, flinched. Then she took her father's arm. Edmund Holt's face had gone the color of ash, and his hand, when she laid hers over it, was trembling, and hers was not. They walked the length of that ballroom. It is 40 yards of marble, the ballroom at Wrexmoor House. She measured it later, when it was hers to measure. 40 yards through parting silk and lifted fans, and the particular hunger of people watching someone else be destroyed. At the great doors she turned, and made the Duke of Wrexmoor a single curtsy, unhurried, correct, perfectly deep and not 1 inch deeper, and said nothing at all. He would remember her silence longer than anything anyone had ever said to him. Later that night, when the ball was ending, the Duke found on the marble by the pillar a small pasteboard card on a gray ribbon. Her dance card. There was not one name written in it. He held it up and showed his friends and said something clever that no one afterwards could exactly recall, and put it, this he never showed anyone, into his waistcoat pocket. He meant to burn it. It would be truer to say that he spent the rest of his life meaning to burn it. In the carriage, going home through the dark, her father wept, quietly, the way mild men weep, with his face turned to the window, and what he said was not about the Duke at all. I am sorry, Verity, I thought. I only wanted you settled high, where no one could ever look down on you again. I have made you a joke instead. Forgive a foolish old man. Papa, she took his hands, and her voice, that night of all nights, was perfectly steady. You offered that man the truest thing you had, and he laughed at it. That tells the world what he is. It tells the world nothing whatever about me. It is not you who will be sorry for this night, and it is not I. She did not say it in anger. That was the thing about Verity Holt that London had failed to notice, and would spend a year learning at its own expense. She was never angry. She merely remembered, exactly and forever, the way ledgers remember. The joke ran through London in 3 days, the way jokes do. I'd sooner marry the plague. It was repeated in clubs and at card tables and in 17 drawing rooms, and it reached on the 4th day a tall, narrow house in Leeds, where a very old woman in black bombazine sat over account books with a pen like a talon. Mrs. Honoria Swan had buried a husband, 2 brothers, and every illusion she had ever held about the gentry. Josiah Swan had been a wool stapler. His widow had turned his warehouses into mills, his mills into canal shares, his canal shares into a fortune that the fine folk of the county called vulgar with their mouths and borrowed against with both hands. She was 81 years old. She was dying without haste, and she had quarreled 40 years ago with the whole soft southern branch of her family, excepting one great niece she had never met, who for 6 years had written her honest letters that asked for nothing. She read the item in the paper twice. Then she wrote 4 lines in a hand like black wire. Girl, I read that a duke has called you the plague before all of London, and that you curtsied and walked out with your back straight. Any fool can be insulted. Walking out is rarer. Come north to me and bring your account book hands. H. Swan. Verity went north in a hired chaise, into a country of black stone and green hills and tall chimneys smoking. and found her great aunt propped in a hard chair like a queen on a cliff, and the two of them looked at each other for a long moment with the same gray eyes. "Well," said the old woman, "you're plain. Thank God. Pretty women get told the truth 10 years too late. Sit down. Tell me what your father's 20,000 is in, and what it yields, and don't round the figure." It was a test, the first of 100. Verity sat and told her to the shilling. The old woman's mouth twitched, which those who knew her counted as laughter, and she pushed a ledger across the table. "Fourth column's wrong somewhere. Cost me £11 odd last quarter, and my agent can't find it." Find it. Verity found it before the tea came in. After that there was no more talk of visits. She simply stayed. Through that summer and autumn the old woman poured 60 years of hard knowledge into her, took her through the mills at Kirkstall, floor by floor and loom by loom, through the canal accounts and the warehouse inventories, through the men, which mattered more, teaching her which agent stole, which manager drank, which foreman was worth double what he was paid. "Money is a language, girl," she said. "The great folk think it vulgar to speak it aloud, so they hire other men to speak it for them, and the other men rob them blind, and that is the whole history of England. Learn to speak it yourself, in your own voice, and never let a soul in a ballroom know how well." Once, only once, the old woman spoke of the Duke. It was a night late in autumn, the fire low, the medicine bottle near. "This Wrexmoor. That laughed at you." Her talon hand found Verity's wrist. "I knew his grandfather. Borrowed off Josiah at 8% to build a glass house for orange trees, and sneered at Josiah's boots across the very paper he was signing. They are all mortgaged to their back teeth, girl, the shining ones. Remember that when you are rich. The house that laughs loudest is the house that owes most." "When I am rich," said Verity, and it was not a question, because by then she had seen the will. Honoria Swan died in the first week of spring, quick and quiet like a lamp going out, with her accounts current to the previous evening. The will was read to a room of astonished cousins, and when the lawyers were done, Miss Verity Holt, of nowhere in particular, held mills, warehouses, canal shares, and a little under £200,000 and, the lawyers were careful to say, held them absolutely in her own sole name, her aunt having had views on that subject that the will expressed at some length. She did not go to London. That was the first thing that made the men of business take note of her. She stayed north through the spring with the mills, and when the summer brought the bank panic, and it brought it hard, 3 country banks stopping payment in a fortnight, good paper going begging, solid men white to the lips, Miss Holt of Kirkstall did not stop a single loom, paid every wage in coin on the day it fell due, and began, very quietly, to buy. Her instrument was the banking house of Meredith and Dacre, and her particular ally there was Mr. Owen Meredith, a shrewd, dry, honorable Welshman of 50 who had actually wept, he told his wife, at finding a client in that terrified season who understood that the moment everything is for sale is the moment to have money. Together with 3 formidable widows of the northern trade, whom her aunt's name brought in, they formed what the papers would later call the Swan Consortium, and its whole philosophy fitted into 5 words that Verity said across Meredith's desk, that August, we buy what fear sells. Fear, that autumn, sold everything. And on a wet afternoon in October, among a parcel of distressed paper offered down from a London discount house at 14 shillings in the pound, Meredith laid before her a set of mortgage deeds, and she saw, at the foot of the first page, pressed deep into black wax, a crest she had last seen in gold above a ballroom door, the arms of the Dukes of Wrexmoor. She read every page. She read for 2 hours, while Meredith watched her over his spectacles, and what she found was what her aunt's ghost could have told her. The northern farms mortgaged twice over, the London house pledged, the whole shining dukedom a shell over a debt of £190,000, of which the paper on the desk, offered at a discount because everyone in the city knew Wrexmoor's interest was 2 quarters behind, was the greater part. "There is history here, ma'am," said Meredith carefully. "I'd not have it said the consortium bought a grudge. The consortium is buying underpriced paper, secured on good English land, Mr. Meredith," said Verity, and signed. "If the borrower happens to have a memorable laugh, that is his misfortune. We will take the whole parcel. And here the story must do what stories about that year in 2 lives must do, and look for a moment through the other window." The Duke of Wrexmoor's year had gone as borrowed years ago. Lady Selina Fanshawe had glittered on his arm through the summer, right up until the week her father's people made discreet inquiries in the city and stopped glittering with the abruptness of a snuffed candle. The joke, his joke, had somehow turned in the retelling, the way jokes turn when luck does. They say Wrexmoor refused £20,000 with a laugh, men murmured now at the clubs, and has since learned the price of laughter. He heard the murmur. He heard it in the way that proud men hear everything they pretend not to. His credit, which had been a kind of weather in London for 10 years, thinned like March ice. Tradesmen who had bowed him into their shops for a decade began, with infinite apology, to mention their little accounts. And at night, alone in the great house he could no longer afford to light, the Duke sat with brandy he had not paid for, and found his memory returning, again and again, to a girl in dove-gray silk who had said nothing at all, to the level gray eyes across his ballroom, and the small straight back going away from him down 40 yards of marble, and the curtsy at the door that had been perfectly deep and not 1 inch deeper. He had a pasteboard dance card in a drawer of his desk. Some nights he took it out and turned it over. There was not one name in it. Neither, any longer, were there many in his. In the spring, a year, almost to the week, from the betrothal ball, the plague came back to London. She came back quietly, which was the only way she did anything, and yet the town seemed to know of it within days, because £200,000 is its own trumpet. She took a good plain house in a good plain street, and her first public act was one that no one in the ton had a category for. She endowed, with £30,000, a foundation of fever wards for the poor, in memory. The deed said simply, of her mother, Margaret Holt, who had died of typhus fever when her daughter was 9 years old. London digested that slowly. The girl the Duke of Wrexmoor had called the plague had lost her mother to fever, and had answered the insult a year on by building the plague a hospital. There is a kind of retort against which there is no defense at all, and the ton, which forgives anything sooner than it forgives its own bad conscience, resolved the discomfort the only way it knew. It fell at her feet. The subscription assembly for the Swan wards that April was the fullest room of the season, and when the old royal duke, the king's own brother, 60 and shrewd, who liked money that did things, asked particularly to be presented, and bowed over her hand before 400 people, and was heard to say, "Madam, I am told you are the best man of business in England, and I am come to see whether England deserves you," the reversal was complete and official. Overnight, the plain Miss Holt became the heiress of the Swan fortune, the patroness, the original. Dowagers who had laughed behind fans at her river pearls now pointed them out to their daughters as the very perfection of taste. She wore, to that assembly, emerald silk, the first color anyone in London had ever seen her wear, and the same small pearls at her throat, and if anyone thought the pearls odd against such a fortune, no one any longer dared to say so. The Duke of Wrexmoor was not at the assembly. He no longer went where subscriptions were expected. He was, that same week, in the offices of his bankers, being told at last, in words even pride could not restyle, the name of his fate. "Your paper has been bought, Your Grace," said the senior partner. "All of it, the mortgages, the notes of hand, your father's remaining obligations. One holder now stands where 40 stood. You are 2 quarters in arrears, and the new holder has asked, the banker's face was a study in careful nothing, that Your Grace attend at Meredith and Dacre's on Thursday at 11 to settle a schedule." One holder. The Duke stood very still. What man in England has pockets for the whole of it? "It is a consortium, Your Grace. The principal is a Miss Holt." Men who were present said afterwards that the Duke stood at the window a full minute with his back to them, and that when he turned, he looked like a man who has heard the sea coming and knows the distance and the speed of it exactly. On Thursday, at 11, he was shown up the narrow stairs at Meredith and Dockery's into a quiet room with a long table, good north light, and ledgers ranked like a regiment. She was seated behind the table, in grey, dove grey, and he knew she had chosen it, with her hair dressed plainly, and her mother's river pearls at her throat, and his entire life laid out before her in 3 neat stacks. And the 9th Duke of Wrexmoor, who had walked into rooms for 30 years to find them arranging themselves around him, stopped on the threshold as though he had struck glass, and for the first time in his life, 1 year and 11 days too late, really looked at her. He looked, and could not stop looking, and what he saw had been there all along. The stillness that was not meekness, but pressure under perfect control. The grey eyes that read a man the way she read a page. Once, completely. The plain, sensible face that was not plain at all, but only unlit, like a lamp in daylight, like his own great house at noon. He heard, from a distance of 1 year, his own beautiful laugh and the sound of champagne falling on marble, and he understood, in the doorway of that counting-room, with a completeness that emptied him, exactly what he had thrown across his ballroom like a coin at a beggar. "Your Grace," said Verity Holt, "please sit down. This will not take long." He sat. Meredith read the schedule. This was the second thing that undid the Duke, and kept undoing him for months, scrupulously, immaculately fair. No usury, no traps, no petty humiliations. The arrears consolidated. The interest set a half-point below what the market would have screwed from a desperate man. A plain calendar of payments that a careful landlord, selling the London house and living small, might actually meet. He had come braced for revenge. She gave him arithmetic. When it was done, he sat with the pen in his hand and said, "Lo, not to Meredith. Why? You hold me here." He moved his hand a little, taking in the stacks, the room, the year, entirely. Why these terms? She looked at him across the table, and her voice, when it came, was even and unhurried, and struck him harder than any anger could have. "The consortium is not vindictive, Your Grace. It is exact. You will find that exactness is quite hard enough. Sign, please, Mr. Meredith has a client at noon." He signed. At the door he could not help it. A year of 3 in the morning honesty forced it out of him. He turned. "Miss Holt, what I said on a certain evening in my own house. This is a house of business, Your Grace," she said, already drawing the next ledger toward her. "Feelings are not on the schedule of assets. Good morning." The attendances were set for Thursdays. Monthly, the Duke began to arrive early. He told himself it was diligence. He sat in the outer room among woolmen and widows, and heard, through the door, the even voice conducting the business of an empire, and the months of that summer did to the Duke of Wrexmoor what no sermon could have done. He watched her, Across the long table, catch a clerk's arithmetic in his own favor. Your Grace is overpaid by £11 for. The consortium does not keep what it has not earned, and pushed the coins back across the table with her own hand. And he walked down the narrow stairs that day, and stood in the street unable to remember where his carriage was. It would have been so much easier, he thought, if she had squeezed him. A man can hate a squeezing creditor. There is no defense prepared, anywhere in a proud man's armory, against being treated fairly by the person you have wronged. He began, clumsily, at 1:30, for the first time unpurchased and unapplauded, to court her. Flowers went to the good plain street, and came back the same afternoon with a civil card. Miss Holt thanks His Grace, and does not receive flowers at a house of business, which her house on Thursdays effectively is. He appeared at the charity sermon for the fever wards, and put £50 he could not spare in the plate, and had, from her pew, one grave inclination of the head, exactly measured. Like the curtsy. He wrote a letter, the honest one at last, 4 pages at 3 in the morning, the splinter drawn out with both hands, that he had laughed, because he was drowning, and could not bear to be seen drowning. That the letter of her father's had been the only honest offer of rescue anyone had made him in 10 years, and he had known it, and that was precisely why he had laughed. That there was a pasteboard dance card in his desk he had meant for a year to burn. And to that letter she sent one answer, in a hand as steady as a rule: Your Grace, I accept your apology, on my father's behalf, who felt it more than I did. It changes the past not at all, and the schedule not at all. V.H. In September, Lady Selina Fanshawe married the Marquis of Ainsley. 40,000 a year, in a blaze of satin, and was heard to say at her own wedding breakfast, brilliant and laughing, that dukes were very well, but one did like a man whose candles were paid for. London repeated it everywhere. The Duke by then was almost beyond wincing. Almost, and then came the night that London still, in a manner of speaking, dines out on. The autumn subscription ball for the Swan Wards had outgrown every hired room in town, and Wrexmoor House had the largest ballroom in London, standing dark. He offered it, wrote in his own hand offering the loan of the house, the candles, the servants, all of it, for the charities night. It was, everyone agreed, a graceful gesture. Only the Duke himself knew it for what it was. The last desperate move of a man spending his final possession, which was the scene of his crime. And she accepted, by return of post, in 2 lines that he read 40 times, "The committee thanks your Grace." The room, as I have cause to remember, is the largest in London. V.H. So it happened there. 400 candles, the mirrors doubling silk and diamonds, and this time, also, aldermen and mill owners and 3 formidable northern widows in black, and Verity Holt at the center of the room where she had once stood by a pillar, in emerald silk, with the river pearls at her throat, in the house of the man who had called her the plague, raising subscriptions for the sick poor of London on his marble floor. The old royal Duke came, and stood up with her for the first 2 dances, and the ton watched the wheel come full circle and applauded it. And at the supper interval, in a lull between the music, a lull exactly, precisely like another lull, Dominic, 9th Duke of Wrexmoor, crossed his own ballroom in the sight of 400 people, stopped before Verity Holt, and went down on his knees, both knees. On the marble, in the candlelight, in the silence that fell like something cut from a great height. Miss Holt. His voice carried, he meant it to carry. The last proud thing left in him was spent on making sure that everyone who had heard the laugh should hear this. A year and a half ago, in this room, in a pause like this one, I said the vilest thing that has ever been said in it. Every person who laughed is listening to me now. I am not able to unsay it. I am asking, before all of them, On my knees, owning every farthing of what I am, and every farthing of what I owe, for the honor I refused when it was offered me like a gift. I am asking you to be my wife. The silence afterwards had a texture, people said. You could feel it on your skin. Somewhere a fan closed. Somewhere, very far off, a footman held a tray of champagne absolutely level and did not breathe. Verity Holt looked down at the kneeling Duke for a long, level moment, and those nearest swore ever after that there was no triumph in her face, none at all, and that this was somehow the most terrible thing about it, that she looked at him the way she looked at a page of figures, once, completely, adding him up. "Your Grace," she said, and her quiet carried to the walls, because the room was helping it. "You are not in love with me. You are in debt to me. A year and a half ago you could not tell a fortune from a wife, and laughed at the one because you were ashamed of needing the other. Nothing since has changed, except the direction of the begging." She paused, and when she went on, something in the even voice was almost gentle. "I am sorry for you. That part is real. It is also all there is." Then she curtsied. Unhurried, correct, perfectly deep and not 1 inch deeper, her second curtsy to him, the exact twin of the first, and every person in the room who had been present a year and a half before understood precisely what they were watching. She turned, and the crowd parted for her the way it had once parted to watch her destroyed, and at the great doors of his ballroom she looked back, not at the Duke, at the room, and said, with the smallest inclination of her head, "Tell your friends the plague sends her regrets." The doors of Wrexmoor House closed behind her. The Duke knelt on his own marble a moment longer, in the wreckage of the only sentence London would remember him by, and then got up, alone, which took, witnesses differ, either 5 seconds or the rest of his life. What followed had no drama in it at all, which was her signature. The quarter day had come and gone unpaid before ever the ball was held. The schedule he had signed was already breached, and the consortium did in November precisely what the documents had always said it would do, no more. Not 1 shilling's worth more, and not 1 hour's grace less. The mortgages were called. The London house went first, then the Northern Farms, and in the spring the consortium foreclosed upon Wrexmoor House itself, and she did the thing no one had imagined. She gave it to the fever charity. The staterooms became wards. The orangery his grandfather had mortgaged the farms to build became a convalescent hall, full of light, where poor men sat among orange trees. And in the ballroom, 40 yards of marble where champagne had spilled, and a laugh had landed, and a duke had knelt. The trustees put 40 beds, and a plain stone tablet by the door that said, in letters a person could read from the middle of the floor, in memory of Margaret Holt, who died of the fever. "The plague," said London, which never forgets a good line even when the joke has changed hands entirely, "has taken the house." The Duke was left, because the consortium was exact, and exactness cuts both ways. The small hunting lodge in the North Country and an annuity of £400 a year, secured against nothing he could pledge or lose. Somehow that mercy was the finishing stroke. Men can make a tragedy of ruin, but there is no attitude at all to strike over 400 a year, prudently secured. He went north. He did not marry, not the following season, when a duke, even a broken one, might still have found takers, and not ever. He grew gray early, and quiet, which those who had known his laugh found the strangest thing of all. In the lodge there was a desk, and in the desk a drawer, and in the drawer, to the end of his life, a pasteboard dance card on a gray ribbon, with not one name written in it. And once, years on, a traveler weathered in overnight at the lodge, not knowing his host, told over supper the famous story of the London hospital in the great house, and the heiress who built it, and the Duke who was said to have laughed at her once in that very ballroom. And his host, an upright great gentleman, with the manners of another age, was quiet a moment, and then said only, "Yes, I have heard that too." She, meanwhile, became exactly what she chose to become, which was the point of her and the whole difference between them. The swan wards multiplied into 3 cities. The mills prospered, the men were paid in coin on the day. The consortium's name on paper came to mean what her aunt's word had meant in Leeds. Her father lived another 20 years, long enough to be bowed to in rooms that had once laughed at his coat, and to sit in the front row in a new coat he still thought too fine. On the day the royal duke opened the Margaret Holt convalescent hall among the orange trees, and if you had asked Edmund Holt what his daughter's fortune had bought, he would not have mentioned the mills. She was offered marriage. Better men than dukes asked, and some of them were even honest, and she refused them all so kindly that every one remained her friend, and lived sovereign in her good plain house, rich, useful, unmocked, and entirely unbought, to the end of a long life. She was asked once, an old woman by then, by a young person too new to be frightened of her, whether she had ever forgiven the Duke of Wrexmoor, and she considered the question with that old level attention as though checking a 4th column, and said, "I sent him my regrets." My dear. He knew exactly what they were worth. He priced them himself, you know, in his own ballroom, at the top of his voice, in front of everyone. For that is the account, entire, of the 9th Duke of Wrexmoor, who was offered rescue in dove-grey silk and river pearls, and laughed, who learned a year too late to see what had stood by his pillar, and who knelt on his own marble before 400 witnesses to hear the only answer his laughter had left her to give. She rose, he never did. The house that laughed loudest was the house that owed most, and when the reckoning came for it, it came quietly, in a plain hand, at 14 shillings in the pound. The plague sends her regrets. If this story of a laughing duke and the quiet woman who outlasted him held you to the end, do a kind thing for the storytellers, press the like button, and share this with a fellow lover of grounded historical romance and deeply drawn slow-burn drama. Subscribe to The Duke's Undoing, so you never miss the next chapter of Pride learning its price. And tell us below in the comments, when he knelt before all 400, should she have said yes? We read every answer.